So The Sims 3 absolutely blew my mind when it first came out. I was an avid fan of the first and second installment, so one day when I opened up a brand new Sims 2 expansion pack to find this little flyer inside, my interest was immediately piqued. What if you had to live your whole life in one location, and then one day suddenly you could step outside and go anywhere in the whole neighborhood? The Sims 3 gives you the freedom to create unique Sims and immerse them in your own living neighborhood of endless possibilities. Fun fact, when I was rummaging through all my games to look for that flyer, I found this copy of The Sims 2 for PlayStation 2, and inside it is this handwritten guide to all the cheats in The Sims 2 for PlayStation 2 that I hand wrote and put in the insert inside the case. If that isn't a stark reminder of the 2000s, I don't know what is. The new open world felt vast and expansive, the possibilities truly endless. It genuinely felt like a true life simulator. But this is still a Sims game, and so these vast new worlds were filled to the brim with eerie secrets, creepy stories, ghosts, ghouls, cryptids, and bizarre mysteries. And bugs, lots and lots of bugs. Despite being a life simulator with no storyline or plot to progress, there's a surprising amount of lore tucked away within the game, and a lot of that lore is weirdly dark. Today, let's dive back into the disturbing world of The Sims in the second installment of this series, this time focusing on The Sims 3. The previous video was about the spooky secrets and mysteries of The Sims 2, and while that video does provide a little bit of context to The Sims 3 and how it's different to the previous game, you don't have to have watched it to watch this one. Without further ado, grab a grilled cheese, make sure your motives are all maxed out, and add a ladder to the pool because we're about to dive straight into the creepy lore of The Sims 3. Sorry for the interruption, but I just wanted to let you guys know super quick, I have released a new piece of clothing in my store. It is the Edgy Cat Sweater. It says cringe but free, and it has a little edgy MS Paint cat on the front. I really love it. I'm so happy with how it came out. You can get it on my store, izzies.com. This is limited edition, so it will only be around for about a month. So yeah, definitely go check it out if you're interested. I'll put the website name on the screen and in the description. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and now on with the video. Released in June of 2009, The Sims 3 was the third mainline game in the Sims series, expanding on the previous games with more realistic graphics, many new features, and most importantly of all, a seamless open world with no loading screens. This was a huge deal. Players went from having to taxi between lots with a loading screen in between, giving the game a pretty small boxed-in feel, to having complete freedom. The world was huge and expansive, and your Sim could go anywhere they wanted, whether it was into town to do some shopping or to some isolated far-reaching beach to collect minerals and gems or go bug hunting. The game was a huge success, selling over 10 million copies since its release, making it one of the best-selling games of all time. And since this is EA we're talking about, of course it got a plethora of stuff packs and expansion packs. In order they are World Adventures, high-end loft stuff, Ambitions, fast lane stuff, Late Night, which I wasn't allowed to get as a kid because my parents felt the cover art was quote-unquote too sexy, Outdoor Living stuff, Generations, Town Life stuff, Pets, Master Suite stuff, Showtime, the much-loathed Katy Perry Sweet Treat stuff pack, a cheap celebrity tie-in that the community still absolutely hates to this day, Diesel stuff, Supernatural, Seasons, 70s, 80s, and 90s stuff, University Life, Island Paradise, movie stuff, and last but not least, Into the Future. So yeah, it was a lot. EA went really hard with the expansion packs this game, and it's still hotly debated to this day whether that's for better or for worse. Much like the previous game, there's a rich tapestry of dark lore that you can piece together from subtle environmental storytelling, little clues scattered around the world, and sim bios. But unlike The Sims 2, the third game is all about the open world, so there's a lot more emphasis on the gameplay and the general experience of just being immersed into the world of The Sims. And a lot of that experience is being spooked by random creepy features and sinister lore. There's a lot to explore in the big wide world of The Sims 3, so let's just jump straight into... Now let's talk about the physical towns and worlds themselves. The open world lends itself to exploration and adventure, but also to quiet, solemn moments. The atmosphere out in the world can be really eerie at points. Lonely mountain roads at dusk, misty swamps and marshes, the hot desert under a sea of stars, the vast open sea at night dotted by a solitary lighthouse, a lonely cliff on a rainy grey day. The sound design, visual effects, and colours all come together to make these locations unique and spooky in their own way, and this is all enhanced by the fact that the towns aren't super populated. You have occasional cars driving by and you'll see Sims in town, but there's so much vast empty space on the map that it feels really lonely and isolated, and honestly it's kind of awesome. The melancholy vibe that they managed to capture completely by accident in the game is super cool, and I just love setting the camera down in a pretty location and watching the world go by. There are of course the intentionally scary areas, like heading to a graveyard at night. You'll hear unsettling noises and see the ground become covered in fog, and you're almost certain to see ghosts roaming around. Your sim can go exploring in the creepy old mausoleums if they're feeling extra brave / stupid. Interestingly, some worlds have abandoned mine shafts hidden away on the map. Unfortunately, these can't be entered or explored, but high quality minerals tend to spawn around them, and if you look inside the boarded up entrance, you can see a pair of glowing eyes. While the general ambience of a lot of these locations is ooky and spooky, the world of The Sims 3 is frequently just really beautiful. There's something lovely and peaceful about the environments. The slightly outdated graphics and vast levels give the game a nostalgic liminal feel that's really nice. But it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom and rainy seaside cliffs and dark catacombs to be scary. The Sims 3 is just as effective at horror when it's set on a tropical sun-drenched shore. Ever since I was a kid, I've been a huge fan of like fish and marine biology and all things to do with the ocean, so the promise of being able to scuba dive in this pack was super exciting. Because the scuba diving wasn't just a rabbit hole activity where your sim swims out to a dive spot and disappears for a few hours. No, dive spots in Island Paradise were actual underwater lots that you could see and interact with. This was incredibly exciting, and I spent many an hour training my sims up to be world-class divers, but what I didn't expect is how scary the scuba diving could be. The water varies in colour from a vibrant tropical blue to murky and dark, and the dive spots range from lush and dense with green kelp and laden with treasure to vast, empty and filled with sharks. And on the topic of sharks, they're kind of terrifying in this game. There are 4 different types: great white sharks, tiger sharks, lemon sharks and black-tip reef sharks, and they'll spawn randomly above and below the water. If left alone, sharks will simply circle around the dive site and eventually despawn, but if your sim has low scuba diving and athletic skills and or has meat and fish in their inventory, they're likely to attack. The chances of this happening are hugely increased if the sim is actively watching the sharks and following them around, which, yeah, that seems fairly ill-advised, especially if your sim has a shit ton of lynx sausages and patties in their wetsuit like mine did. Shark attacks aren't usually fatal. Most of the time your sims will narrowly escape with a mauled by shark moolah and have to resurface, and sometimes they'll even win the fight and beat the shark. Your sims generally have to be pretty terrible at scuba diving, laden with meat, and have the gasping for air moodlet to actually die from a shark, but when they do, well... This is by far the most gruesome death in the series. The others can be scary, yes, but this is the only one where you have to see your beloved sim's ribcage and bones floating through the water. Very grisly, very gory, genuinely kind of makes my skin crawl, I think, just because it's so uncharacteristically graphic for the series. Though it is kind of traumatizing, the upside is that ghost sims who died by shark attack have one of the coolest and rarest color schemes with this sort of neon orange and purple with water flowing through it. Very nice. But sharks aren't the only thing that you have to worry about in Island Paradise, because a far scarier and far bigger predator hunts off the coast of the mainland. I'm sure most of you probably know what the Kraken is. It's a classical creature of nautical myth and legend, but if you don't know, here's 3 words for you: giant freaking squid. The Kraken is super rare. If a sim stays out in a small boat for too long, there's a 4% chance of seeing it and only a 1% chance that it will attack. An attack won't kill or harm sims, but it will destroy their boats. The Kraken is actually far less dangerous than the shark, but visually they're way scarier. The sheer size of the creature as they slowly pass beneath boats is terrifying, but it's even worse seeing their full size up close under the water at a dive site. The rarity of the encounter makes it feel that much more forbidden and terrifying. In summary, Island Paradise was advertised as a beautiful, sunny, tropical getaway with sandy shores and mermaids and lounging on beaches, and all I got was darkness and death. I went to Isla Paradiso and got mauled by a shark, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. And actually, on the topic of fish, I found something super weird about the death fish that I really wanted to mention before we move on. Death fish are one of the many types of fish that can be caught in the game, and I was already gonna bring them up because as a kid I really loved them because they look like a dragonfish or a viper fish, so they're already pretty creepy. But then I found a post that pointed out, When you zoom in, Deathfish are actually little mini Grim Reapers. What I thought was a gaping mouth at the front of their bodies is actually a hood, and inside there's a tiny skull. Also, originally I thought they were pretty small like most deep sea fish are, but when you actually look at them in the water relative to their surroundings, they're huge, as if the graveyards needed to be any creepier. So the third installment of The Sims made a pretty big change. No longer would you have to kind of guess how your sim was feeling by their motives bars and wants and fears, but you would actually be able to tell exactly how they felt with moodlets. Moodlets are little icons that pop up in the lower bar and describe certain feelings, thoughts, or emotions that your sims are having. Positive moodlets give your sims a mood boost, negative ones lower your mood, and neutral ones that, well, they don't really do anything. Most moodlets are pretty generic, you know, having a good time, enjoying a meal, well rested, minty breath from brushing your teeth, etc. But on the odd occasion you'll get a random creepy moodlet out of nowhere that kinda makes the hair on your neck stand on end. Here's my list of the top 10 most unsettling moodlets in The Sims 3 in no particular order. Number 1. Dark Slumber. This occurs in the Supernatural expansion when a witch gives your sim a poisoned apple which will cause them to pass out and take a huge minus 50 point hit to their mood. Your sim can't die from this, but the idea that some other sim is trying to poison them is disturbing to say the least. Number 2. Monsters under the bed. Again, in the Supernatural expansion, sims can check under their kids' beds for monsters. Most of the time there'll obviously be nothing there, giving the child a positive moodlet, but every now and then the adult will in fact find a monster under the bed, which will trigger this moodlet and a pair of red eyes to appear in the darkness. Ugh. Number 3. Malfunctioning. This moodlet is exclusive to Plumbots from the Into the Future expansion and occurs when their maintenance need drops really low. This is fixable with a simple tune-up, but you can't help but worry when futuristic robots start malfunctioning in fiction. It's usually just a precursor to total world domination, so, you know. Number 4. Creeped Out. This moodlet appears as a spooky disembodied green hand, and sims often get it after uncomfortable interactions, most often romantic advances that they don't want. I think this one's creepy because we've all been there, and you know what? This is an accurate artistic representation of that feeling. Number 5. Mugged. Subways made their debut in the late night expansion, providing a fast and convenient way to zip around the big city, but public transport has its risks. Sims have a 3% chance of getting mugged while riding the subway, which will cause them to lose simoleons and take a minus 15 hit to their mood. This is pretty unsettling, but it also makes me appreciate how many little details went into Bridgeport to make it feel like a real big city with nightlife and a gritty underbelly. Number 6. Breathing shallowly. When scuba diving in the Island Paradise expansion, you'll have a certain number of hours breathing comfortably with your oxygen tank, and this number increases the better you are at diving. Once your oxygen begins to run out though, you'll begin breathing shallowly. Something about the idea of being deep underwater and starting to feel your breaths weaken, and something about this gaunt, wide-eyed emote is really eerie. I don't like it. Number 7. Brushed with zombie fingers. You can get this moodlet in the Seasons expansion when going into a haunted house. I don't think this needs any further elaboration. I mean, it's brushed with zombie fingers. What else do you want? Number 8. Visceroidal nausea. This one's creepy just by virtue of how random and obscure it is. The description reads, quote, Tiberium has been slowly contaminating the planet for years, leading many to question its value when contrasted to the sickness caused. Tiberium is a gem introduced in World Adventures, and if kept in a sim's inventory for too long will give them this moodlet and make them really sick. So yes, radiation poisoning is basically canon in The Sims 3. Number 9. Mauled by a bear. If sims go exploring in the catacombs, they have a small chance of coming out with a few battle scars from a bear, and this moodlet as a memento. And finally, number 10, and I know this isn't a ranked list, but I do find this one probably the most unsettling, Creeping Dread. In World Adventures, tombs can have different and unique characteristics. They can be hot and humid, giving sims the oppressive heat moodlet. They can be filled with dive wells and water traps, giving them the humid atmosphere moodlet, or they can be exciting and filled with a mystical feeling. If you're unlucky though, your sim might stumble into a tomb that gives them a feeling of creeping dread. This moodlet is triggered if the tomb's marker is set to death in by debug mode, and the description reads, quote, These tombs stand atop an ancient burial ground or something more dreadful. There's a chill in the air as if thousands of restless spirits are spying on your every move. There are a lot of spooky moodlets in the game, but there are even more goofy moodlets. For every truly unsettling vibe that your sim gets, they'll get 10 more completely random, inscrutable moodlets with horrendous images. Hungry like the wolf, freezer burn, comfort food, madly thirsty, awkward. All of these Sims 4 moodlets that came with the Into the Future expansion. They're basically just advertisements like, we get it EA. Feeling purple. Literally any of the snow cone ones. These are all just horrendous. I can has. Wish this was the only time they had referenced outdated internet cat memes in the franchise, but unfortunately, it is not. And last but certainly not least, impressed by the chocolate fountain. The chocolate fountain item was exclusive to the Sim store and you had to buy it with Sim points, and by God were they trying to hype this thing up to holy hell. You could get not 1, not 2, not 3, but 5 different moodlets from interacting with this one goddamn fountain. One of which, of course, is impressed by the chocolate fountain. Chocolate shame is also pretty good too. And as a palate cleanser to wrap this section up, here's my favourite moodlet. Loved, which pet cats will get after receiving affection from Sims. That's just plain old sweet. Now we don't have time to go in depth on every single little creepy detail in the game, otherwise we'd be here for like 10 days. 10 sim days that is. So let's just do a quick fire list of some of the main ones. The game is so expansive and there's so much that I'm almost definitely missing stuff, so if there's anything that I missed out or anything that you noticed, definitely let me know below. Alright, let's go. The creepy stalker ice cream truck. Something of an inside joke within the community, the ice cream truck was introduced in the Petz expansion and drives around the neighborhood serving sweet treats on hot days. However, the truck isn't programmed to stop at other Sims houses, so it'll often drive aimlessly around before parking up at your house for hours, sometimes in the early hours of the morning, giving it a very stalkery feel. Though to be fair, if Mr. Whippy pulled up at 3 AM outside my house every night, they would have one loyal customer. Moving gnomes. An odd new addition into The Sims 3 is that of the mysterious Mr. Gnome item. These lawn ornaments seem normal at first but are secretly sentient and will actively move around your house at night. Many players are alarmed upon placing the cute little decorations, only to find days later that the gnome's location in the house and even their pose has changed. They change positions at 1 AM and will sometimes interact with objects such as turning TVs on in the middle of the night or spawning on beds. The gnome comes in different varieties, including a cat gnome that has a 0.7% chance of appearing every time a cat gets whacked out on catnip. This game is truly magical. Evil changing paintings. The Supernatural expansion adds a series of paintings to buy mode, depicting different pleasant subject matters that become more sinister on a full moon. A lone figure becomes engulfed in flames, a man turns into a skeleton, a woman turns into a ghost, a house becomes foggy and dilapidated, you get the picture, but literally. Ghost story dialogue. In Generations, Sims have the option to tell ghost stories. When the story is over, you'll get a little dialogue pop up with the final line of the story, usually something cheesy about a headless rider on the moors or something goofy. However, some Simmers were alarmed when they didn't realize their Sims were telling a ghost story and suddenly got an out of context pop-up reading. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't cover up the stain, with absolutely no further explanation or elaboration. Without context, I too would have freaked out. This is literally how every haunted video game creepypasta starts. And lastly, this isn't exclusive to The Sims 3, but of course, burglars and that damn creepy music that plays when they show up. I swear, burglars are the bane of every child who plays a Sims game's life. That shit is scary. Now that we've extensively covered the gameplay and the world of The Sims 3, let's move on to... Death is a natural part of the life cycle of a Sim. Unless they're cramming ambrosia by the spoonful, they're gonna kick the bucket at some point, and after beginning to experiment and play around with shocking, silly, and sometimes gruesome deaths in The Sims 2, the team decided to go full throttle in The Sims 3. You have the usual, of course, old age, starvation, electrocution, fire, and drowning, which, as a side note, they kind of nerfed in The Sims 3 since it's the first game in the franchise to actually let Sims exit a pool without a ladder. But rest assured, players found a way around this by building a fence around the pool so Sims couldn't exit. You know what they say, you can lead a Sim to water but you can't stop their malevolent overlords from playing God. Anyway, you have your standard methods of expiry, but then you have the really weird ones. Being crushed by a vending machine, being crushed by a meteor, being crushed by a Murphy bed. Yeah, The Sims 3 has a real thing for squishing Sims. Being eaten by a carnivorous cow plant, dying from ranting too intensely, frostbite / freezing to death, being attacked by a shark, and dying from eating a cursed jelly bean. There are a few few that go above and beyond in terms of scariness though. For example, the buried alive / watery grave deaths from the Showtime expansion. In this expansion, Sims can perform magic tricks as a magician and will receive the Box of Danger item as a career reward. The buried alive trick submerges your sim in a box full of sand, and the watery grave trick submerges them in water, and these stunts have a small but very real chance of failing and drowning your sims. These deaths have pretty graphic animations, especially watery grave. Seeing sims struggle for air and then just float their limp inside the box is really creepy. In the Supernatural expansion pack, which introduced supernaturals, your sim can become a witch and learn magic. One of the darkest spells available is the Haunting Curse, which can kill the witch casting it if it backfires, causing them to collapse in a blaze of magical light. Into the Future has two of the creepiest deaths in my opinion. The first is the jetpack crash. If your sim is a lame modern day scrub and isn't experienced using future tech, there's a 25% chance that their jetpack will suddenly jerk upwards, carry them miles into the sky, and hurl them into the ground in a flaming ball. Sims can also catch time paradox sickness when using a time portal. If they don't admit themselves to hospital, their sickness very quickly progresses and they begin blinking in and out of existence with arms or legs vanishing briefly. In the late stages of the illness, they begin to perform an action called Do I Even Exist, where they'll begin to fully fade in and out of reality. Eventually they'll disappear completely in an honestly pretty horrifying animation. The existential horror of this one is slightly offset by the fact that this is most definitely a reference to Marty McFly, but you know, still pretty eerie. Actually, my favorite thing about ghosts in The Sims 3 is not low-key how traumatizing their deaths are, but how cool they look. Sims 2 ghosts were usually just monochrome with a few little effects like dripping water for drowned ghosts or sparks for electrocuted ghosts, but The Sims 3 went super hard with the ghost designs. Cursed jelly beans make Sims bright violet and turquoise. Witch Sims who died from a haunting curse will be deep black and green with little skulls and graves floating around them. Vampires who die of thirst will come back bright red with a visibly beating heart. Sims who are transmutated, meaning they used a magical object to turn stuff into gold, but it backfired and turned them into a solid gold statue, will be gold with flashy little stars swirling around them. And Sims who died from ranting will be bright lime green with little cussing symbols around them. Interestingly, plumbots, basically advanced robots that you can play as in the Into the Future expansion, can actually die, and when they do, they'll have a little green holographic pattern on their ghost. I just love all the little details here. It gives a lot of life, pun intended, to the ghosts. Life states are another spooky feature that make a big comeback in The Sims 3. Life states, also known as occults, are various monsters / creatures / supernatural beings that your Sims can transform into. Werewolves, witches, and zombies are carried over from The Sims 2, as are vampires. Though it is interesting to note that there was a bit of a kerfuffle around The Sims 3 vampires. Most expansions come with their own unique life state as a part of the draw, but vampires were introduced in two different packs, Late Night and Supernatural. Supernatural added a few new features and tweaked the life state a bit, but Sims were pretty annoyed that EA basically copy and pasted a life state for two different packs. While several of these life states were watered down and made a lot less creepy, for example the werewolves went from looking like this to this, and zombieism went from a permanent life-ruining affliction to just a temporary 48-hour effect, there were still several brand new and pretty unsettling occults. The creepiest in my opinion is the imaginary friend introduced in the Generations expansion pack. Once the pack is installed, any baby that's born will have a 75% chance of receiving a package from a relative containing a plush toy. The toy looks sorta like a cross between a ragdoll and a robot, and its colours will be randomized. If the toddler plays with the toy and accrues enough relationship points with it, it will transform into a life-sized thing when they grow up into a child. Yes, the doll is now an imaginary friend. It is now alive and sentient and in your house, and there's nothing you can do about it. The child can talk, play, and bond with the imaginary friend and even get it to do chores, but only they can see it. It'll appear completely invisible to other Sims. The imaginary friends can change back into their doll form at any point and will grow in size alongside the Sim who owns it. They start off child size but will grow taller as the Sim becomes a teen and young adult. The imaginary friend can enter a third and final optional stage of development. Using a potion they can be made quote unquote real. This will turn them into a real human Sim that physically exists and can be seen by everyone. They'll often wear garish, bright clothing that corresponds to their toy patterns and have unnatural hair and eye colors. Even after being made real, they can still revert back into a doll and will sometimes teleport around the house. And yes, now that they're real, they can woohoo with other Sims, including the Sim that they were originally given to as a child. So wrong on so many levels. I honestly love the imaginary friends for how creepy and unhinged they are. You have your normal supernatural creatures like werewolves and witches and vampires, and then you have these freaks. These dead-eyed, invisible pastel doll creatures that stalk around the house, getting bigger and more intimidating as the years pass by. Imagine being an adult and not realizing that you have a fully grown robot doll demon living in your house that could probably beat you in a fight. And then you have the existential horror of the friends becoming real. Imagine suddenly having a strange neon-coloured Sim show up and start living in your house, but your kid says it's fine because they're an imaginary friend and they've actually been living there for years, don't worry about it. Imagine having half human, half doll grandchildren with purple eyes and pink hair. How would you reckon with that? How would you explain that to your friends and family? How long would you harbour resentment towards the relative that sent the toy in the first place? Imaginary friends are the best and worst thing to have happened to The Sims 3. They're completely bizarre and inexplicable in all the funniest ways, and there's no way to get rid of them or delete them without cheats. Just incredible. Mummies are another brand new addition to the series. They were introduced in the World Adventures expansion, which added 3 new travel destinations to the game: Chiang Sim-La, China, Champs-Les Sims, France, and Al Samhara, Egypt. Tomb exploration was one of the biggest features introduced in the pack, allowing Sims to delve deep into ruins and tombs to loot them for precious relics and gems, and if they're stupid enough to crack open a sarcophagus, come face to face with a mummy. If a mummy is awoken, it will try to fight your Sim, and if they lose, the mummy might curse them. The cursing animation is pretty creepy, with their eyes beginning to glow and a dark magical force coming out of them and into the affected Sim. Once cursed, Sims have 2 weeks before they'll die, crumbling into a pile of sand. As the curse progresses, a dark shadowy border will appear on the edges of the screen, and towards the end, a mummy's face is visible, slowly fading in and out. This is one of the only times that The Sims 3 uses this kind of like fourth wall breaking, glitching effect. It's really effective partly because it's so unexpected and jarring. Thankfully there are tons of ways to cure the curse and you have 2 whole weeks, so it isn't usually fatal, but if you can't get enough of mummies, you can actually add them to your own household as a playable Sim. You can acquire a mummy for your family in 2 different ways. Your Sim can become one by sleeping in a cursed sarcophagus where they'll emerge as a brand new mummy, or you can summon them by collecting all 5 pieces of a sarcophagus as well as the entire Canopic Jars relic collection. Your Sim can then construct the sarcophagus and use the Canopic Jars to summon a mummy, which will then join your household. Mummies are one of the most interesting life states. There are a lot of little quirks and details that make them quite unique to play as. They're classified as elder Sims but have an extremely long lifespan, about 10 times the length of a human Sim. They can get jobs, learn skills, develop relationships, and even get married. They're also immune to electricity, so make good handymen, and if a burglar sees a mummy in the house, they'll immediately flee. Since they're undead, they don't need to sleep or go to the bathroom either, so they're pretty low maintenance. Unfortunately, they can't have children, so no mummy babies, and they're also extremely flammable, so keep them away from the kitchen. If they're near any fire, even just a fireplace, they'll become scared and immediately try to put it out. Since they're wrapped in bandages, they'll become soggy when in contact with water, so if they go swimming, they'll track water all over the ground. I also just wanted to share this absolutely hilarious line from the Sims wiki on mummies, quote, "Mummies are the slowest life state and thus will limp from location to location. Often this can lead to mummified Sims missing work or failing time-based events, but this disadvantage can be partially bypassed with the hoverboard or fairy dust." Even though I do like mummies as a life state in the game, there is something to be said about how the franchise depicts different cultures. World Adventures was and still is pretty controversial within the simming community for how it depicts different places and cultures. Tomb raiding is one of the main features of the pack, allowing Sims to explore ancient tombs and ruins to solve puzzles and loot them for simoleons, gems, and artifacts. This left a bad taste in some players' mouths, as a lot of real countries that the Sims included in this pack have extensive histories of their culturally important artifacts being stolen. Mummies have been similarly appropriated. They were originally just a natural and very unscary part of life in Egypt, simply a way to prepare a body for burial and passage to the afterlife. But as Egyptomania took hold, Westerners began to exoticize and mysticize the practice. After the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 and the supposed curse that haunted the party of men that opened it, mummies came to be seen as monstrous, malevolent beings. And as you can probably tell, this interpretation of the mummy is very much reflected in The Sims 3. At the end of the day, the World Adventures pack is fun, running around taking photos and solving puzzles and drinking wine wine, or as The Sims 3's Peggy 12 rating likes to call it, nectar, is a good time. But you can play or watch or engage with something and still criticize it or bring up questions about certain elements, especially when the community has been debating it for so long. The Sims 3 is a big game. There are a lot of worlds, there are a lot of families, so let's just dive straight into all the obscure, strange, and downright creepy lore that we can find within the game. This wouldn't be a Sims video if we didn't talk about the Goth family, who are so infamous that they're basically the main characters of a franchise that has no plot. That's just how iconic they are. In the Sims 2 video, we talked extensively about Bella Goth and the theory surrounding her disappearance from Pleasant View. We concluded that she was most likely abducted by aliens, a theory which was all but confirmed when The Sims 3 Lunar Lakes dropped and she was found buried in a graveyard on a distant planet. But Lunar Lakes isn't the only instance of Bella appearing in The Sims 3. She appears in the default town Sunset Valley as a child. So you might be thinking, hold on, she was married with children in The Sims 2, but in The Sims 3, she's an elementary school child, and yes, welcome to the extremely confusing and contradictory timeline of the Sims franchise. It's currently believed that the first 3 games are set in the same timeline but out of order, and we can track the time period and how far apart each game is by following Bella herself. The Sims 3 is the earliest point in the timeline with Bella being a child. The Sims 1 comes next. In the first game of the series, she's an adult and married to Mortimer Goth. The Sims 2 comes last and is the most recent point in the timeline with Bella having multiple children and also being missing. Now this is where it gets a bit wacky, but The Sims 4 is theorized to be on its own alternate universe timeline. Many key elements are different. For example, the Caliente sisters have different parents and look super different, and Bella never went missing, among many other cosmetic and story changes. The fact that the first 3 games take place not only on the same timeline but not that far apart from each other explains why some Sims are in multiple games, often in different towns and at different life stages. The chronology of the games and the various families tends to make sense, but there are also a lot of inconsistencies and plot holes. The in-universe explanation for this is the existence of the Into the Future expansion, which adds time travel, which is a very convenient way to explain away any sort of plot hole that your story has. I'm gonna assume that in reality the explanation for this is that they made the games in a 1, 2, 3 order, but then for some reason they made the lore all out of order, so it's all jumbled up, so they didn't know certain things when they were making certain games, and then they had to go and retroactively change things, and it's all just a big jumbled mess, and I'm assuming they're just kind of trying to explain that away. This is just a personal theory, but I also think they just really wanted to keep including Bella Goth in the games because they know she's popular, so they were just like, yeah, Sims 3 is set before Sims 2, throw her in as a kid or something. Wait, you're saying there's nowhere else she can be on the timeline that makes the story make sense? Just say this next game is an alternate universe or something. The players will be too upset about the pools to care about the story. But we're not done with the Goths yet. If the big question of The Sims 2 was where is Bella Goth, the big question of The Sims 3 is who is Lolita Goth? The Goth family tree in The Sims 3 consists of a young Mortimer Goth who will eventually go on to marry Bella, his mother Cornelia, and his father Gunther. Also on the tree are Cornelia and Gunther's deceased parents, Prudence and Simon Crumplebottom, and Gret and Victor Goth respectively. So if there are 4 total deceased Sims in the Goth family, why are there 5 graves in the yard? The 5th grave belongs to a Sim called Lolita Goth, a young adult with grey eyes, freckles, and light brown hair who wears a grey dress and striped leggings. She's the only ghost in the graveyard who didn't die from old age, instead having died from electrocution. The weirdest thing about Lolita though is that she's not related to any of the Goths, she's not listed as having any relatives, and she's not on the family tree. So what exactly is going on here? Well, there's a few theories. Many have proposed that her name is a reference to the Vladimir Nabokov novel, and as a very rough parallel to that book, she's the much younger partner / mistress of the older Gunther. And look, I know that is an extremely simplified parallel to the book, but come on, The Sims gets dark, but it's not gonna get Lolita dark. It's been argued that this theory is backed up by Lolita's traits. Bookworm, a reference to the novel itself, as well as the traits charismatic, great kisser, hopeless romantic, and childish, which are all very gross and uncomfortable if you're taking this as a Lolita reference. Furthermore, Gunther and his wife Cornelia have pretty low relationship points for a married couple, perhaps indicating some sort of incident or infidelity earlier in their relationship, which could have pushed Cornelia to seek revenge against Lolita. However, there is a far simpler answer to this mystery. It's been proposed that Gunther was married to Lolita as a young man before she died tragically young. years later after getting over the grief he met and married Cornelia. This may explain why their relationship is so strained, perhaps the feelings of grief over his first wife still linger. This would also explain why Lolita isn't on the family tree. When a Sim's spouse dies, they are automatically divorced and removed from the family tree. This is purely for mechanical reasons, like if the Sim was still marked as being married to their deceased partner, they wouldn't be able to remarry since you can't marry two Sims at once in the game. And if a Sim isn't a blood relative, the only way they can be on the tree is by being a spouse, thus Lolita, being Gunther's deceased wife, would have been removed from the family tree entirely. She shows up as having no family because her only relationship was with Gunther, who was a spouse and thus removed, and they never had any kids. It is spooky to see a seemingly related Sim in a graveyard that shows up with no family connections, but it's basically just the mechanics of the Sims getting in the way of its own storytelling and causing a bit of a hubbub. I also think that Lolita's name is probably more of a pun on the gothic Lolita style of like fashion rather than a nod to the novel, but I could be wrong. Though the mystery of Lolita Goth has plagued the town of Sunset Valley for years, I think that we can probably safely put this one to rest. Pun intended. Also, fun fact, Mortimer Goth's mum, Cornelia, is the sister of the infamous Agnes Crumplebottom. Yeah, believe it or not, the Goths are related to the Crumplebottoms, and now that we're on the topic, let's talk about poor old Agnes. She's featured as an NPC simply called Miss Crumplebottom in The Sims 1, a stern old woman who will scold Sims who engage in PDA on public lots and sometimes even smack them with her purse. So this is another case of the franchise having really confusing timelines, but the Mrs. Crumplebottom in The Sims 2 is not Agnes. Sims 1 and 3 Miss Crumplebottom is different than Sims 2 Mrs. Crumplebottom. Agnes is actually deceased in The Sims 2, and Mrs. Crumplebottom is explained to be a distant relative who has picked up the proverbial torch of harassing random couples for holding hands in public. Anyway, in The Sims 3 we actually get to see Agnes in her younger years and find out why she developed into such a grumpy old lady, and it's actually pretty sad. From her description, quote, Agnes Crumplebottom hadn't even changed her last name into her husband's when an unfortunate accident on her honeymoon ended their marriage. Between her growing bitterness and her husband's ghost scaring away gentlemen callers, only the bravest Sim would ever try to win her heart and fortune now. It turns out her husband, Eric Darling, drowned on their honeymoon, leaving Agnes all alone. Even more heartbreakingly, they wanted children together, and in Agnes's home you can see a children's room with a crib and a teddy bear which remains unfinished. So Miss Crumplebottom isn't just some angry old lady that hates love, she's a heartbroken widow who couldn't bear to see happy couples when she lost her one true love and her future children in a terrible accident. Terribly sad and really dark, but fantastic environmental storytelling. Speaking of iconic Sims 2 characters making a comeback in The Sims 3, let's talk about Olive Spectre and Midnight Hollow. Midnight Hollow was a gothic horror themed world added to The Sims store. Noticeably darker, foggier, and more monochrome than the other worlds, it definitely leaned into that kind of dark Victorian Sleepy Hollow vibe. The world has an introductory bio written by Olive Spectre, who featured in The Sims 2 as a suspected serial killer with an entire graveyard in her backyard and a long list of deceased ex-husbands. The intro, written in first person, reads, quote, Life is hard and people will always have something to say about you. All of her husbands die mysteriously and suddenly, or I think her son was fathered by the Grim Reaper, or I'm pretty sure she's a murderer. Where do they come up with this stuff? I moved here to get away from the normal life, to find a life that's normal for me. Let them have their starlight and shores. I'll take my century-old Victorian mansion, eerie landscape, and interesting neighbours every time. Here's hoping you're next. I mean, being my new neighbour, not the whole murder thing, FYI. See you at Midnight Hollow, Olive Spectre. Midnight Hollow Olive, oh my god, try saying that 10 times fast, is much younger in The Sims 3, matching up with the wacky franchise timeline, and is still living with her half-human, half-Grim Reaper son, Nervous Subject. Her garden has multiple graves already, and at this stage she already has 3 deceased husbands, Hugh Thanasia, Rigor Mortis, and Ichabod Spectre. For the first time we can actually see her traits. Bookworm, friendly, light sleeper, unlucky, and commitment issues. Unlucky may relate to her being unlucky in love, light sleeper may refer to sleeping with one eye open after figuratively and literally stabbing so many people in the back, and commitment issues, well, obviously. Being set earlier in the timeline, Olive is a lot less threatening here than in The Sims 2, but it's cool that they added her and dropped a few little lore hints. Always nice for the more iconic characters to be expanded on. One of the creepier families in Midnight Hollow are the Does. The Doe family consists of John and Jane Doe, as well as their kids Jennifer, James, and Joseph Doe. In murder investigations, victims whose identities can't be determined are often nicknamed John and Jane Does, and child victims are nicknamed Jennifer or James Does. The family gets creepier when you take a look at their bios. Quote, Jane is the perfect housewife, from her neat hairstyle to a fashionable yet conservative dress. She's neat, nurturing, loves her kids, and can make a mean pot roast. Meanwhile, John is rising in the ranks at his corporate job. He feels successful in life and supported by his family. He works hard but comes home in enough time to teach his kids a lesson or two about life and talk to his wife about her day. Nothing mysterious seems to be happening here, but didn't their house used to have a basement? Additionally, an interview with the family on the Sims 3 blog further hints that something is pretty wrong. Quote, well, it all seems pretty excellent. So tell me, what brought you to Midnight Hollow? It seems a little dark for your sunny family. Jane, a little frantically, are you sure you wouldn't like that tea? Joseph gets up angrily, walks out of the house and slams the door. Jen sits quietly and stares ahead with an eerie, blank expression. James giggles and plays happily in the corner. John, you know, just a change of scenery. You never know where the winds will take you and all that. Right. So how about a tour of the house? John, you know, it's clear that Jane isn't feeling too well. I think it's time for you to go. I love that interview so much. It's like so unnecessarily creepy, but I also think the roleplay format, it adds a lot. So obviously many simmers have speculated about what exactly is up with the Does. It's been suggested that the Does may have murdered the Salas family who live in the house next to them and are all ghosts. Without further evidence, it's hard to know exactly what's going on there, but whatever it is, it can't be good. Maybe we'll get an elaboration in a future game, who knows. The Remington family is a similarly mysterious bunch of Sims who live in Riverview. Fortunately, they aren't suspected of killing anyone, but unfortunately, they're all dead. Hannah and Aiden are a young married couple who have just moved into Hannah's deceased uncle's house. Unbeknownst to them, the house is haunted not only by her uncle but his entire family. The weirdest thing is they all died in completely different ways. There's Hannah's mother, Lydia Remington, who died from drowning, her uncle and aunt Jasper and Eileen, who died from electrocution and starvation, and their two kids, Cody and Kirsten, who died from fire and drowning. The Remington estate itself is an extremely bizarre build. Their house has a strange mismatched shape with bizarre castle-like extensions and bridges. The layout is elaborate and confusing, with completely empty rooms that serve no purpose, stairs that lead nowhere, and inaccessible balconies. There's a fireplace on the porch, and garish wallpaper decorates the many strange rooms inside. The house is clearly a reference to the real-life Winchester Mystery House, famous for its bizarre, nonsensical layout, pointless rooms and stairs, and strange appearance, and also famous for allegedly being haunted. My friend Kaz Rowe has a fantastic video on the Winchester Mystery House and the real story behind the rumors. It's really great, you should definitely check it out. Kaz is epic. It's a fascinating story, and it's actually really cool that The Sims referenced it in such a neat way, even if playing the Remington family is actually pretty creepy. While not explicitly horror themed, the town of Twinbrook, which comes with the Ambitions expansion pack, really stands out for having a lot of creepy little details. Heavily based on the state of Louisiana, Twinbrook is a large town partially submerged in an expansive swampland and is designed in a French style, which is true of many real-life bayou towns. The mood of Twinbrook is truly sublime. The marshy outskirts of town are thick with hazy, humid fog as crickets and frog croaking fills the air. It's visually quite dank and dilapidated, coloured by a sickly green hue and overgrown with gnarled trees and huge weeping willows. Sitting and just taking in the swamp's ambience, it's simultaneously peaceful and unsettling. One of the most striking features that Simmers noticed when first booting up the town is that all of the deceased Sims have a distinctly green look. They all have green skin, greyish white hair, grey eyes, and bare feet, and their favourite colour will also be replaced by grey. The reason behind this has never been confirmed, but it's presumably to add to the sickly green swampy atmosphere that parts of Twinbrook have. It may also double as a reference to the DC Comics villain Solomon Grundy, who was buried in a swamp and emerged as an undead zombie-like creature with green skin and greyish white hair. This leads us to another mystery of Twinbrook: why the exits are blocked off. If you go into the map view and look at all the entrances to and from town, several appear to be blocked off. The unobstructed roads out of town also appear to go from concrete road to dirt path, implying that Twinbrook is some sort of out of the way, hard to access location. Players have theorized that Twinbrook is meant to be some sort of disaster/apocalypse town, with the undead Sims so heavily resembling zombies and all of the exits blocked off. It's been theorized that the town is in isolation after a zombie outbreak. Others speculate that the town is quarantined due to toxic waste or contamination in the water, causing the sickly green coloring of the town. On a discussion post about the blocked exits on the Mod The Sims forums, user SummerSong86 wrote, quote, "Actually, it's kind of a sad reminder of what's really going on down in the regions affected by the horrendous oil disaster down in the Gulf. I've seen some first-hand accounts and videos of what the conditions are like in the marshes down there and how bad life has become for people affected by it. When I load up Twinbrook, I'm struck afresh by how sickly coloured the town is. It's got kind of a sick greenish yellow tinge even far beyond the deep marshy areas. It's such a far cry from the deep vibrant greenery of Sunset Valley and Riverview. I think if they weren't going for some sort of disaster-based backstory, they could have coloured the town a lot different, even taking into consideration the marsh. They could have gone with more healthy shades of ambers and browns and not a very pale hint of asparagus green over everything. But green Sims and blocked exits aren't the only thing wrong with Twinbrook, and it's implied that a lot of the families there have pretty dark backstories. The Bayless family, consisting of parents Gwaine and Skeet and kids Chase and Tay, live in the bayou portion of Twinbrook. Gwaine's bio reads in part, quote, "The family lineage is a bit murky and anyone who has ever tried to track it down has only been led in circles. This has actually led Sims to suspect the family may have a history of inbreeding. The Sims has never shied away from dark humour or references, but the bio could also just be suggesting that the family records are hard to track down." Another mystery is that of Pixie Carlton and why her remains are in an urn in someone else's house. The Rackets are a large family of criminal masterminds, likely modelled on a mafia family. The matriarch of the family, Marigold, is a retired supervillain, and several family members have kleptomaniac, evil, and mean-spirited traits. On their mantle, there's an urn containing the remains of a Sim called Pixie Carlton. Pixie is related to the currently alive Sim Sophia Carlton, an extremely rich celebrity with virtually no talent according to her bio. With her bleach blonde hair and last name relating to a famous hotel chain, she's clearly a parody of Paris Hilton. Her defining trait is her wealth, and her bio states that she got it from a huge inheritance, which she likely received from her sister Pixie. It stands to reason that the Rackets, being a criminal household, may have killed Pixie in order to steal her fortune. However, for whatever reason this didn't work and the money was passed to Sophia. Either way, very bold move to keep the ashes of your victim on the family mantle. Perhaps the most curious mystery in the bizarre bayou town is that of Macy and Lacey, and bear with me on this one because it's a doozy. This one is bonkers. So there's a Sim who lives in Twinbrook called Juan Dera. He's an elder Sim and he lives in an old barn which stands next to the broken remains of his burned down house. His wife, Lacey Dera, is deceased and her grave is located in Juan's junkyard. Juan only has one strong relationship in his life, his best friend forever, Harwood Clay. Harwood, like Juan, is an elder Sim who lives in Twinbrook and he is rocking the hell out of their emo haircut, good for him. He also has a deceased wife, Macy Clay, who is buried behind the laundromat in town. By now you're probably thinking, wow, these two best friends both have deceased wives that look exactly like each other. Are the women twins? And that's the weirdest part. Macy and Lacey, despite looking identical, having the exact same tattoo, having most of the same traits, and having matching names, are not listed as being related. And you can't chalk this one up to the family tree mechanics being weird either, because if Macy and Lacey were related, they would be on each other's tree. Spouses get severed upon death, but family members don't. I even went out of my way to test this since I wanted to make 100% sure that's how ghost family trees actually worked, and yeah, the test family that I made, comprised of two siblings, remained siblings on the family tree after both dying and becoming ghosts. Even after one was sent to the netherworld, aka fully dead and unable to be brought back, the ghost was still linked on the family tree. And here's where the crazy conspiracy kicks in. What if Macy and Lacey weren't sisters but clones of each other? Juan has a high skill level in inventing and his lifetime wish is Monster Maker, which requires Sims to create 3 monsters. The description for the wish reads, quote, "For some Sims, the ultimate pastime is the unending search for new types of life. Whether created through mystical, laborical, or convergent methods, occult creations are wondrous achievements for Sims who prefer to dabble in the unknown. Some may call them monsters, but to their creators, they're just another member of the family." Now, cloning is canonical in The Sims 3. There are several methods of cloning Sims, from using a cloning ticket at a science facility in Generations, to brewing a cloning potion in Supernatural, to engineering a clone cloned from a sample with a high science level in university life. However, all of these expansions came years after Ambitions, the pack that Macy and Lacey are included in. This explains why Juan has a high inventing skill and not a high science skill, presumably because the dev team knew they wanted to add cloning at some point but hadn't nailed down the specifics. So here's what I think happened. Juan, heartbroken over a recent breakup that we can see listed in his relationships, decided to play God and clone himself a wife. His best friend, Harwood Clay, is described as having retired from a life of fame and riches. It stands to reason that he might have a young, beautiful wife, Macy Clay. Juan convinced Harwood to let him clone his wife, creating Lacey Dara, an identical copy of the young woman with a few varying traits. However, in the process of creating the clone, something went wrong with the experiment, causing a fire that burned Juan's house down and killed both Macy and Lacey, whose causes of death are both listed as fire. There are holes in this theory though. For example, if Juan really did kill Harwood's literal wife, why are the two men still listed as best friends? You would have thought that would put some strain on the relationship maybe. And why are the two girls buried in suspicious locations rather than just at a graveyard? I would understand trying to conceal the grave of a failed clone, because surely an experiment like that would land you a one-on-one with the FBI, but if Macy was a real sim, there would be friends and family wanting to visit her grave. So maybe instead of being clones of a real sim, Macy and Lacey are clones of each other, fully created in a lab as a Frankenstein-style science experiment. The two lonely men both wanted wives, so engaged in a highly dangerous experiment that killed the test subjects. Bonded by this horrific trauma and a fear of being caught, they buried the clones in nondescript locations and vowed to never speak of it again, explaining why their bios mention none of this. But the answer could be something completely different. This one is really odd and quite baffling, so I'm really curious to hear what you guys think below. Let me know if you have any theories. We've talked a lot in this video about The Sims 3 being creepy. Eerie atmospheres, haunted houses, spooky plotlines, but thankfully, all of it is fictional. But that's what makes the infamous haunted doll virus so scary. It was 100% real. In 2010, around a year after the game's initial release, the modding scene was bigger and better than ever, with hundreds of new custom content items and mods uploaded daily. The doll first appeared on the Sims Exchange, an official website created by EA that allowed players to create and upload as well as download custom content. The package was called Girl Doll Dressed and was a clone of the teddy bear item with a human-like reskin, making it look like a terrifying haunted doll that toddler Sims could play with. Despite looking like actual nightmare fuel, many players downloaded this custom content unaware that they had just downloaded an infectious, game-breaking bug. Once downloaded, the doll could cause unplayable lag, broken towns, and even entire corrupt save files. What's worse is that it could be spread from player to player like a virus. Players began uploading lots, houses, and Sims to the exchange without knowing that the packages had been infected by the doll item, causing hundreds more players to become infected upon download of the items. It caused a bit of a moral panic within the Sims community, with people freaking out about this haunted doll virus that was going to infect everyone's computers, even adding warnings to their forum signatures. You know, back when forum signatures were a thing. Quote, "This is corrupted doll that is attaching in invisible way to nearly all items on Exchange. Check if you don't have her in your game and your studio. Don't allow it to spread to more simmers. Click the Siggy for more information and help how to get rid of her. Let's make Exchange doll free." The rumors flew around that this was some sort of malicious hacker trying to infect the PCs of the simming community. It turns out the original creator of the mod simply didn't realize that the file was broken when they uploaded it. They eventually took it down after EA stickied a thread on the forums explaining that the doll wasn't haunted, just a corrupted file, and explained how to delete it from the game. Finally, simmers could rest easy. Girl Doll Dressed had been defeated. Stories of corrupted mods or broken custom content aren't unique in the gaming world, that shit happens all the time, but the fact that this literally took the form of a creepy haunted doll and was 100% unintentional makes it truly legendary. While there's no topping the sheer scariness and infamy of Girl Doll Dress, the Adventureland glitch is a close second. Despite the fact that it sounds like a theme park that would overcharge you for the ring toss, it was actually a glitch that occurred all the way back in 2015. If you download the Sims 3 World Adventures expansion via Origin after patch 69, which was the patch that came out just after The Sims 4 release, you'll find a new town is available from the starting menu. Adventureland. Adventureland looks exactly like Sunset Valley but will be completely empty with only two families living there, the Hardy family and the Ransone family, both consisting of a single sim and adventure clothing with the description Adventure Local. The graveyard is still populated with gravestones, but rather than bearing the names of any sims, they'll all simply say Remains. The gravestone item is called Remains by default when placed from the by debug menu, so this isn't too out of the ordinary, but what is odd is that the default Remains will have the sim die by fire. These graves all have plaques that represent death from old age. When this glitch first popped up, there was a lot of discussion about it within the Sims 3 community and a lot of rumours. One of these rumours was if you played Adventureland, eventually a box would pop up with the Grim Reaper saying, "Would you like to go on an adventure?" before crashing the game. This was like a real life creepypasta within the Sims 3 community, and a lot of Simmers genuinely believed that Adventureland was haunted or corrupted in some way. Though Adventureland does seem scary and weird at first, there's a simple explanation. It was simply a testing mode for the game devs to use while developing world adventures. They tested out different interactions and features here, explaining why the two families are described as adventure locals and wear adventuring outfits. They may have been used as beta or test versions of the local Sims that live in the different travel destinations. It also explains the name of the world itself. What isn't clear is why the graves are different from the default graves and why the bug is still present 5+ years after it first came up. Players have been badgering EA about this issue for years, but for some reason they haven't actually made any effort to fix it. Turns out the scariest thing about this mystery is EA's negligence towards its own player base. Ooh. Let's round off this section with a list of some of the most infamous bugs within the game, because you know it wouldn't be an EA product without copious bugs that make the game nigh unplayable. Here we go. Number 1, Slender Sims, aka the stretched toddler glitch. This was an extremely common glitch, especially when the game first came out, that caused toddler Sims to become unnaturally tall and stretched out, giving them a terrifying Slenderman-esque appearance. Highly unnerving. Pray that you never get this in your game because you will shit your pants. Number 2, Broken Faces. Similar to The Sims 2, a glitch can cause Sims' faces to become broken and buggy, but instances of this in The Sims 3 tend to be more, let's just say, extreme. The face will often stretch and spike out or downwards, creating a mess of the model, and the eyeballs will often be shown popping out of the face. Truly horrific stuff. Number 3, Sentient Sims, aka the moving head effect. If you've played this game for any length of time, you're probably all too familiar with this one. You're unbothered, you're moisturized, you're in your own lane, you're playing the game as usual, but when you hit pause, everything stops, except for your Sim's head, which will continue to slowly move even after pausing. This is extremely creepy and makes you think for a split second that your Sim has come to life and gained sentience and is about to turn their head directly at the camera and look at you. I wish I could reassure you guys that this one is a glitch, but no, your Sims are actually sentient. They know your sins. They know what you did. Number 4, the Mummy's Curse scuba diving glitch. This occurs when both World Adventures and Island Paradise are installed and a Sim dies from the Mummy's Curse while diving underwater. This causes the Grim Reaper to spawn and remain stuck underwater for eternity. On one hand, kinda depressing for him, on the other hand, Scuba Grim is a great name for a supervillain. Number 5, let's just do a grab bag here. Sims turning invisible, Sims getting stuck in walls, Sims pulling interesting faces, and whatever caused this abomination. Number 6, the Infinite Babies glitch, which can add tens or even hundreds of babies to your family tree. These parents are never gonna sleep a day in their lives again. And lastly, number 7, the game's general poor quality. Look, I absolutely love The Sims. I spent a very unhealthy amount of time playing it as a kid, time that I should have spent developing my social skills, but I didn't, and now I have none, and now I can only talk to people about The Sims. But it's widely considered to be the least stable game in the franchise. Corrupted Sims in towns, broken features, glitching models, terrible lag, broken pathfinding, frequent crashes, and more. The Island Paradise pack, though it's one of my all-time favorites, is near impossible to play for many people because of how game-breaking the glitches are and how poorly it was optimized. It's basically a bunch of bugs and system errors in a trench coat. It's an often repeated joke within the community that you know your rig is good when you can run all the Sims 3 games plus custom content without your computer literally exploding, and it shouldn't have to be that way, especially for how steep the original price tags of each of the games were. The Sims 1 and 2 were always criticized for having expansion packs, and EA were always called greedy or money hungry for pushing them out, but it was only when the third game came out that these issues started becoming really prevalent. It was clear that priority was given to pumping out stuff packs and expansions rather than optimizing the game and fixing game-breaking bugs and issues that players had been begging them to fix for years. Unfortunately, the game was never fixed, and instead these these issues got 10 times worse in The Sims 4, but that's another very lengthy topic for another video, wink wink. With that out of the way, let's wrap this thing up on a more positive note. The Sims 3 may not be perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and it absolutely has its flaws, but so does every game in the series. I love The Sims with all my heart, but I'll be the first to admit that it is a very messy franchise, always has been and probably always will be. Despite this, there's still an enormous community of players and creators and storytellers and people who are endlessly passionate about it. The community is what makes The Sims, and it's a testament to how much people have connected with the game over the years. Even with the release of The Sims 4, there's still a bustling community of players who love and play and make content for The Sims 3 despite its age and despite all of its flaws. There's just something special about the earlier games, that extra bit of edge, the spooky details, storylines and features and little tidbits here and there that are just a bit dark and just a bit gritty. All the nuances that went into the different ghosts, the vast open worlds with creepy little secrets scattered about, the effects and lighting and ambience in the secluded areas, the intricate yet subtle storytelling. None of this was necessary. They could have just made a perfectly clean and squeaky and wholesome game, but I think for a lot of Simmers, myself included, that element of mystery and darkness, those moments where your hair stand on end when you get burgled, or your Sim is yoinked by a shark, or you get a pop-up mentioning a terrifying unremovable stain, those are the moments that stick with you and make the game so exciting. Sims 3, you'll always be legendary. And so will your spin-off games, but that's a story for another day. Thank you guys so much for watching, I really appreciate it. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I mentioned this on my Patreon, but I've actually tried to make a Sims 3 video before. I was absolutely obsessed with the game as a kid, literally played it all the time. That and Sims 2 were like my main things. And I tried to make a Sims 3 video back when I very first started the channel. I was sitting on the floor in my room, the video quality was horrendous, audio terrible. I had a Sims 3 video like case glued, like blue tacked to the wall behind me as my only decoration. It was grim. Let's just say that. My point is basically I've been wanting to cover this for a long time. I'm really passionate about it and I'm so glad that I could share it with you guys today. I really hope you guys enjoyed it as well. It's honestly, The Sims is such a crazy franchise, so definitely let me know if you had any creepy Sims 3 experiences, your favorite moments from the game, anything that I missed out, because I know there's just like so much to cover that there are tons of things I probably didn't even get to include in this video, so definitely let me know that, any theories on the mysteries in the game, just anything. I love hearing your guys' thoughts, so please leave them below and I will very much look forward to looking at those. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for supporting me as always. I can't thank you guys enough, I don't thank you guys enough, so thank you. I really appreciate it and I really hope to see you in the next one. Bye! Thank you to my Garford overlords over on Patreon: Joe Bradshaw, Grip Gunderson, Jesse Chisholm, Astrian Vortex, The Fabu Librarian, Sheriff Whiskey, Dozo Blint, Helm Hamburger Hand, Xavier Rauho, Ren Pendragon, John Leach, Simon, Charlie B, Dana Homegardener, Jordan Nielsen, Doug, SHSL Sunsun, Matt LRJ, Michelle Olsen, Jorge K. Cruz, Fitzy, Katrina Likes 5e Stuff, Electro Kitten, Blue Mayfeld, Caramel Coffee Bean, and Test Subject 0089. Thank you guys so much for supporting me. It means the world if you want to join these guys over on Patreon. The link will be in the description. And yeah, thank you guys so much for supporting me. Thank you for watching the video and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!